The crowd fell silent as Muhammad Ali stepped into the ring, his movement slower than the lightning-fast footwork that once made him untouchable. Across from him stood Mike Tyson, 22 years old, muscles coiled like steel cables, eyes burning with the hunger of a predator who had never known defeat. This wasn't supposed to be a real fight, just an exhibition, a charity event, two legends from different eras sharing the same canvas. But when Tyson's first jab connected with Ali's jaw, something shifted in the atmosphere. The sound echoed through Madison Square Garden like a gunshot, and Ali staggered backward, his hands dropping to his sides. If you're already getting goosebumps from this moment, hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell, because what you're about to witness will change everything you thought you knew about these two boxing legends. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that hype button if you're ready for this incredible journey. The arena's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Ali's weathered face as he steadied himself against the ropes. At 49, the man who had once floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee was fighting a different kind of battle, one against time itself, against the Parkinson's disease that had already begun to steal his voice and slow his reflexes. The crowd of 15,000 had come expecting nostalgia, perhaps a few playful exchanges, some showmanship from the greatest of all time. Instead, they were witnessing something that felt dangerously real. Tyson circled like a shark, sensing blood in the water. His trainer had warned him to take it easy, to remember this was just for show, but the younger fighter's instincts were overriding his instructions. Every fiber of his being had been programmed for destruction, and standing before him was the man whose shadow he had been trying to escape his entire career. This was his chance to prove once and for all that the torch had truly been passed. Ali raised his gloves, but not in the defensive stance that had frustrated opponents for decades. Instead, he simply stood there, arms at his sides, chin exposed, eyes locked on Tyson's with an expression that was impossible to read. The crowd began to murmur, confusion rippling through the stands like a wave. What was he doing? Was this some kind of strategy? A mind game that only Ali could conceive? Tyson hesitated for the first time in years. He had studied every fight, every combination, every defensive maneuver that Ali had ever used. He had prepared for the rope-a-dope, for the psychological warfare, for the verbal sparring that preceded the physical. But this complete surrender of defense, was something entirely unexpected. The younger fighter's fists remained cocked, but doubt crept into his eyes. The referee looked between the two men, unsure whether to intervene. This was uncharted territory, a moment that existed somewhere between sport and something far more profound. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable, broken only by the distant sound of camera shutters clicking and the collective held breath of thousands of spectators. Then Ali spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the arena. "Hit me," he said, the words slurred but unmistakable. "Show them what you got, young man." Tyson's hands began to tremble, not from fear but from something he had never experienced before. Here was his idol, his tormentor, his inspiration, offering himself as a sacrifice. The crowd erupted in confusion, some shouting for the fight to be stopped, others leaning forward in morbid fascination. But Tyson couldn't move. For all his ferocity, for all his reputation as the baddest man on the planet, he found himself paralyzed by an act of such pure vulnerability that it defied everything he understood about combat. The seconds ticked by like hours. Ali remained motionless, his breathing steady, his gaze never wavering from Tyson's face. It was as if he was seeing something in the younger man that no one else could perceive, some hidden pain or fear that transcended the brutal world they both inhabited. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in stark relief. The sweat beading on Tyson's forehead, the slight tremor in Ali's hands, the collective tension of a crowd witnessing something they would never forget. What happened next would haunt Mike Tyson for the rest of his career, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Tyson's right hand, which had ended fights in seconds, which had sent grown men crashing to the canvas unconscious, slowly unclenched. His arm dropped to his side as if the weight of what he was being asked to do was too much to bear. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the most feared heavyweight in the world began to back away from an opponent who wasn't even defending himself. "I can't," Tyson whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I can't do it, champ." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished flame. Here was Iron Mike, the destroyer of dreams, the nightmare that haunted every heavyweight division, reduced to a confused young man standing before his hero. The psychological warfare that Ali had perfected over decades had reached its ultimate expression. Not through aggression or intimidation, but through an act of such profound trust that it shattered every assumption about strength and weakness. Ali's lips curved into the faintest smile, the same expression he had worn after defeating Sonny Liston, after surviving the thriller in Manila, after every moment when he had proven that boxing was as much about the mind as the body. He stepped forward and placed a gloved hand on Tyson's shoulder, the gesture so gentle it seemed to contradict everything the sport represented. "That's what I thought," Ali said, his voice gaining strength. "You got a good heart, Mike. Don't let nobody tell you different." The arena erupted. Some spectators were on their feet applauding. Others sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The referee, unsure of protocol for a situation that had never occurred in the history of professional boxing, simply stepped back and let the moment unfold. Photographers rushed toward the ring, their cameras capturing an image that would grace magazine covers for decades. Two of the greatest fighters who ever lived, embracing in the center of a boxing ring, one having proven his dominance not through violence, but through an act of radical vulnerability. You're probably wondering how this moment changed both men forever, right? If you are, drop a yes in the comments, because what came next revealed something about human nature that goes far beyond sports. But the story was far from over. As the two men separated, something in Tyson's eyes had fundamentally changed. The rage that had fueled his rise to championship, the anger that had made him the youngest heavyweight champion in history, seemed to drain away like water from a broken dam. For the first time in his adult life, he was face to face with a different kind of strength, one that didn't require fists or fury, but something far more difficult to master. The crowd began to settle, but the energy in the arena had shifted completely. What had started as an exhibition between two legends had become something closer to a religious experience, a moment of grace that transcended the brutal world of professional boxing. Ali, sensing the change in atmosphere, began to move around the ring with something approaching his old fluidity. Not the lightning-quick footwork of his prime, but a measured, almost ceremonial dance that reminded everyone present why he had been called the greatest. Tyson followed, no longer stalking but almost learning, as if he was a student in the presence of a master. The younger fighter threw a few light jabs, more out of obligation than aggression, and Ali responded with gentle deflections that were more teaching tools than defensive maneuvers. It was boxing stripped of its violence, reduced to its purest form, an art, a conversation between two bodies that spoke a language older than words. The crowd began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the exhibition they had paid to see, but something far more valuable, a masterclass in humanity, taught by two men who had spent their lives learning to hurt each other and had somehow found a way to heal instead. As the rounds progressed, though they had long since stopped feeling like rounds in any traditional sense, Ali began to share stories between the gentle exchanges. He talked about his early days, about the fear he had felt before his first professional fight, about the loneliness of being a champion. Tyson listened with the intensity he usually reserved for studying opponents, but this time he was studying something far more complex than fighting techniques. "You know what the hardest part is?" Ali asked during what should have been a break between rounds. "It ain't the punches, it ain't the training, it's learning when not to fight." The words hit Tyson harder than any physical blow ever had. Here was a man who had built his entire identity around controlled violence, being told by his greatest inspiration that true strength sometimes meant restraint. The concept was so foreign to everything Tyson had been taught, everything he had believed about himself, that it felt like learning a new language. The final rounds became something closer to a dance than a fight. Ali, despite his physical limitations, seemed to grow stronger as the evening progressed, as if the act of teaching was restoring something that age and illness had taken away. Tyson, meanwhile, was discovering parts of himself that had been buried under years of rage and pain. The crowd watched in fascination as two of the most famous athletes in the world explored what it meant to be human. When the final bell rang, there was no winner declared because there had been no real contest. Instead, both men stood in the center of the ring, breathing heavily not from exertion, but from the emotional weight of what had transpired. The crowd rose as one, applauding not for a victory, but for something far more rare, a moment of genuine transformation witnessed by thousands. Tyson would later say that night changed everything for him. The anger that had driven him to championship glory, but had also led to his darkest moments, began to transform into something else. Not weakness, but a different kind of strength. Ali, for his part, had proven that even as his body betrayed him, his mind remained the sharpest weapon in any arena. The footage of that night would be studied for decades, not by boxing analysts, but by psychologists, philosophers, and anyone interested in the complex nature of human courage. It became a testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an opponent, but from refusing to engage in a battle that serves no purpose beyond destruction. Years later, when Tyson spoke about that night, his voice would soften in a way that surprised anyone who knew him only through his fearsome reputation. He would describe it as the moment he learned that true power came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the wisdom to know when that power should remain unused. Ali, he said, had taught him the most important lesson of his life without throwing a single meaningful punch. The arena that night had witnessed something that transcended sport, something that spoke to the deepest questions about what it means to be strong, what it means to be brave, and what it means to be human. In a world that often celebrates violence and aggression, two of its greatest practitioners had shown that sometimes the most courageous act is the decision not to fight at all. As the crowd filed out of Madison Square Garden that night, many carried with them a story they would tell for the rest of their lives, not about a boxing match, but about a moment when two men chose compassion over competition, understanding over dominance, and in doing so revealed something profound about the human capacity for growth and change. The lesson that emerged from that unexpected evening continues to resonate today. That true strength isn't measured by our ability to defeat others, but by our willingness to show vulnerability, to choose understanding over anger, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest victory is the fight we choose not to have. In a world that often seems divided by conflict and competition, perhaps we all need to remember the night when Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson showed us that there's another way, one that requires more courage than any physical confrontation ever could. What do you think about this incredible display of humanity over competition? Have you ever experienced a moment where choosing not to fight was actually the stronger choice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on this powerful lesson about true strength and courage.